take as much time learning from the participants as well as giving, long-winded speeches. The third thing is that from my point of view, I would be, or from the government's point of view, very interested in knowing what we need to do. So the focus should be on practicality. What is it that's possible here, and what should we be doing? So if somebody can, at the end of the two-day workshop, organize in simple English exactly what are some of the 5 things or 10 things that we need to do, which are neither so formidable that nobody can do it in less than 10 years, and not too obvious either. So I would be grateful for that. How do I see some of the, challenges here, and what are we attempting to do to try and create the right environment for these kind of ideas and schemes to flourish? Let me start, first of all, especially for our foreign guests, to say that this government inherited a very, very threatening economic situation. And we had to do, over the last 16 months, a lot of things to try and restore macroeconomic stability. Tough decisions had to be taken. And I think after a series of steps of that sort, having to do with partnering with international bilateral and multilateral institutions, trying to take tough decisions on cutting down government expenditures and restoring certain fiscal discipline, trying to provide a lot of incentives to exporters to try and narrow the historically high current account deficit. I think we are now in a situation where in the last 4 months of this fiscal year, we are beginning to see the restoration of macroeconomic stability. For the first time in many years, we have a current account surplus this month. For the first time in many years, we have our primary balance on the fiscal side is in a surplus. The stock market, which is one barometer of confidence, is amongst the best performing in the world for the last few months. The exchange rate, which we took a bold decision to allow market forces to determine, has stabilized and is allowing people to make the longer-term decisions needed for Pakistan's development. We have a renewed interest from the international community in the Pakistani markets. In the last 4 months, the investment in Pakistani bonds from outside investors has reached $1 billion. The foreign direct investment has increased in this period by about more than 200% compared to the same period last year. I'm not trying to say that everything is rosy. We still have the challenge of trying to tackle prices. We still have to deal with, of course, the expectations of the people related to generating more jobs and achieving higher growth rates. But the good news is that the growth rates that we agreed with the IMF are going to be surpassed by a vast margin. Similarly, the IMF just did a review of the first quarter, and they concluded that all the agreed criteria with them, all the performance agreements with them were surpassed by comfortable margins. So this is a good show of confidence. And I think what I want to say is that this is a government committed to fiscal discipline. It's a government committed to the role of the private sector. It is a government committed to transparency, good governance, and cracking down on corruption. This is a government that is reaching out to international community, both in the multilateral agencies, but even more importantly, in the international and domestic private sector. So a platform has been created on which to build and correct some of the deficiencies of our country's, economic legacy. Where are the areas that we have historically, as a country, not done so well? Well, first is that we have not done a very good job in attracting foreign investment or in boosting our exports. And this is the big lesson of history, that if you cannot tackle the question of alliances, partnerships, business relationships with the rest of the world, you cannot really bring prosperity to our people. So I think what we have been trying to do is really create an environment which is conducive for these kind of mechanisms to flourish. What we have tried to do, in spite of budgetary constraints, is to give incentives to our exporters. For example, there are no taxes on exports. Because we realized that exports had stagnated in the last 5 years. The growth rate of exports in the last 5 years was 0%. We decided to remedy it. So we are providing support to our exporters by giving them subsidies on electricity, giving them subsidy on natural gas, giving them subsidy on loans, and last week we announced a 300 billion additional availability of credit on subsidized rates. And as a result, we are beginning to finally see exports go up. And in this 4 months that have passed, exports have begun to rise. So that's a good solution. As Dr. Shamshad Akhtar said, we need also to think in terms of improving domestic productivity by making our state-run corporations better, and most preferably in the hands of the private sector. So we are trying to generate new momentum on the privatization side, and I would like that some of these innovative schemes and ideas are helpful in structuring some of those transactions. At the same time, we are trying to remedy another big problem that we have had historically, which is to generate revenues for the government. Because if we cannot generate revenues, some of these schemes we cannot perform. And some of the infrastructure requirements which inevitably fall upon the government cannot be undertaken. And some of the counterpart funds we need to make available for our development institutions cannot be forthcoming, and we would be forced to borrow. So it's very important that we try to do a much better job, and I want to report to you in the first 4 months of this year, in fact, our revenue collection has increased by over 15 to 16% for the same period last year. And if you discount for the loss of revenue from import compression, then this number goes even above 20%. Another important source for the government to support infrastructure and SME is to generate funds through non-tax revenue. And I would like to also report to you that our non-tax revenues in the first 4 months are like more than double those of last year. And although our target for this year is 1.2 trillion, in fact, I want to tell you with confidence that that target will be surpassed easily. So the combination of things that the government has to do, I want to come here and share with you. Of course, there are some institutional requirements that have to be fulfilled before the private sector or other participants can really fully flourish with these kind of instruments. I see sitting in the government ministry here in Islamabad that a big challenge is how to make the different stakeholders coordinate and cooperate. Because we have a constitution that is a federal one, and you know that we have states or provinces that are very important in the decision making. So what we need to do is figure out better ways of coordinating between the center and the provinces on the one hand, and between the international agencies and the government on the other hand, and between the different parts of the government on the third hand. Because you have the planning ministry, the economic affairs ministry, the ministry of finance, of course, revenue ministry, and the sector ministries, whether it is that of power or whether it is that of the water or whatever. So all these things, do pose a challenge. The other, so first, we have to achieve a degree of macro stability, which we feel that we have begun to achieve. Second, we need to coordinate better amongst the different stakeholders. The third, we have to, as a government, provide a good regulatory framework and provide good incentives and try and get some of our institutions to be working better. So on the institution side, I want to tell you that that is our top priority. And we have, for example, in the central bank, brought in a person from the IMF, a good professional, and we have given them autonomy to take decisions on setting up of the exchange rate, on the setting up of the discount rate. My predecessor or the finance secretary in the past would just call the governor and tell him what the interest rate or the exchange rate should be. I don't do that. I don't even like to talk too much about the exchange rate and the discount rate because I want to respect the institutional mandates of different places. Similarly, in the Federal Board of Revenue, we've recruited one of the top tax experts from the private sector who headed a private accounting firm, and we are giving him the authority and the mandate. Similarly, in the Securities Exchange Commission, we have a new chairperson who is here, and he knows that he enjoys our full trust and confidence to be autonomous and take the decisions. We are also setting up a private-public partnership authority, and we are also empowering them, and we are recruiting. We have recruited a CEO also from the private sector. So the idea is that these institutions, including the regulatory institutions that are very important for setting the ground rules, whether it is the PTA, whether it's NEPRA, whether it's OGRA, whether it is whatever, and the government institutions that are semi-independent, they have to be transformed. And I think the Prime Minister's vision is that they should be transformed, they should be headed by genuine professionals, and there should be no conflicts of interest. And we should not demand things from them for our personal benefit, but give them the authority to do things that are necessary to get the overall situation to be attractive for private sector participants. Now, I did mention some of the incentives, and what we are trying to do really is that both for exports, but also for those who want to do business here, we are setting export or economic zones so that you can come and benefit from the set of incentives that are available there. We have a whole city centered around a port that is also converted into an economic zone. We have a good set of tax-related benefits for those who want to come and do business here. Now, of course, we did talk about getting the quality of the regulation right. We are working on it. If you can generate some ideas here, we'll be grateful. We are trying to build institutions, as I said. We are trying to make business performance easier. And as you know, the World Bank has just come out and acknowledged Pakistan as one of the best performers in terms of ease of doing business. So that is a recognition from an independent source. We also have taken steps to increase the pace of our own projects. Previously, the amounts that needed to be approved had to go through many different steps. We have taken that mandate away from the ECNEC and told the ministries and the lower level to take decisions on their own up to 10 billion rupees. So there was a log jam of projects with Asian Development Bank, World Bank, and so on. All those have been resolved in the last few months so that many of these projects are now, on track. And I'm not interested in keeping more and more authority and power to myself or the finance ministry. We want to delegate. We want to let the sector ministries, the planning ministry, and others be able to take decisions so that the wheels of the government can move faster. And so I think these are some of the things that we are doing. At the same time, we obviously have to do many things on the financial inclusion side. I acknowledge that that's an area we need to do better. We need and are trying to do more in terms of debt management. We have a debt management office that is going to be doing a much better job in trying to look at the whole situation of debt, trying to bring the average maturity time less. In fact, there has already been an improvement on that. Because the infrastructure needs are phenomenal, and we have not done a very good job of investing in infrastructure. According to ADB, we need 8% plus of GDP to go into infrastructure over the next 10 years or so per annum. And the gap that we actually invest and what is needed is pretty huge. So we need to really zero in and think about what are the ways, what are the innovative ways, how are other countries more successful in this area, and what can we learn from them? How can we adapt those particular instruments into our own setup? Because the Pakistanis are a very resourceful people. They are very determined, and they are always curious and eager to find good solutions. So if you can come up with those kind of solutions, and that is the strength of the type of people who are here. They combine, institutional mandate with a lot of knowledge and awareness about what works and what doesn't work. On the PPP side, we have always talked about it, but haven't done much on it. So perhaps now is the time to really start doing much about it. And as I said, from our side, we are recruiting a top-notch person to head the PPP. We have in our public sector development program allocated 250 billion rupees worth of projects. And I think the challenge really is how to cut down the processing time of these PPPs. Because they all sound great, but actually they're very hard to do in the real world. So what I want is for people to actually say, look, how can you really do it? And what are the, requirements? Because we can have endless seminars. I was in the World Bank, maybe, I don't know. If I tell you how long back that was, you'll think I'm ancient. But, even in those days, in the 90s, people in the World Bank used to talk about PPPs, and they are still doing that. And I think, but what is the track record? All over the world. And so let's try and see what is the track record, what are the institutional arrangements that are needed, what are the incentives that actually work, and try and challenge the government as well as the private sector, and that's where I'll be looking forward to getting some thoughts from this. So let me try and conclude by saying that this is obviously a very important topic, and I'm grateful for the organizers to have done it. They have also assembled the right kind of people and are dedicated. Really, the trick is how are we going to decide whether this event and the resources spent on it were wisely spent? What is the way that we will measure the success of this two-day event? I think that it will be in the quality of the discussions and ultimately the practicality of the suggestions and what happens afterwards. If everyone splits and some people go to Manila and others go to London or wherever, and you know, some to Lahore and Karachi, they are still better informed. But I think it would be a shame if we do not actually come out with some practical suggestions, an implementation plan, and a way to monitor our progress following from this event, because it's a very big event and we have a lot of expectations from it. So again, thank you for inviting me. I'm honored to be here, and I want to welcome all the foreign guests as well as our colleagues from the provinces, and once again thank the organizers. Thank you very much.